So today is Earth Day, April 22nd, and I really came to love this day when I was teaching school because for the basic reason it could be stretched out the whole year. And with elementary school age kids, they bought in so quickly to doing things to help the health of the planet. Now, this is long before we knew about climate change and feedback loops and all of that. It was just their predisposition that, if there's an opportunity to recycle or reuse, well, that one wasn't so great. Reduce, it wasn't so great either, but the recycle part, kids could have control of that in the classroom and at home. And so it was just the build-up to April 22nd. It was basically 364 days of build-up. We'd often invite in some performers. We'd have a big assembly in the gymnasium with 400 plus kids, all screaming. And we would then celebrate what the school had done class by class to nurture the health of the planet. So I love that kind of energy. Yeah, and then I love it that we do celebrate this every year. We commemorate it, maybe is the better word right now, and that in 2009, the United Nations added another word to this day, and it's now referred to as Mother Earth Day. So that gives another dimension to this day. So sadly, I see since then that I was part of the lie to these kids, because I didn't really probe far enough what happened to things that were then recycled. We did a really good job of recycling, really good. We were very, very all over the fact, are the lights on or are the lights off in the classroom? And every time we would leave the classroom to go somewhere else, there would inevitably be this voice that said, Miss Becker, Miss Becker, Miss Becker, Miss Becker, who's going to turn off the lights? And I would say, you are. Every time we left the classroom, Miss Becker, Miss Becker, Miss Becker, who's going to turn off the lights? So I think we should adopt that here. So we sadly didn't know that this stuff was rounded up and shipped off, probably to China, maybe India, burned, or put in some kind of landfill. Very sad to know that. That's, out of sight, out of mind. So this is how we've been living since beginningless time, really, out of sight, out of mind. And now I'll veer off on a tangent just for a moment. Venerable Sultram and I witnessed this yesterday in the cold room. So in the cold room, where people really don't need to go unless you need some food thing, we found all kinds of things that should have been thrown away quite some time ago. But you know what? The thing is if you don't really know what to do with it, well, let's put it in the cold room until someone else with more seniority or they're assigned to clean the room, they'll have to deal with it. So out of sight, out of mind. I encountered this many, many times when I was out hiking in beautiful, pristine places. You're walking along a creek bed, you round a corner, and all of a sudden there's this waterfall of old garbage. So it kind of makes sense, farmers in decades past, there was no landfill, there was no garbage dump. So you'd take your garbage to a place that had a drop-off, you'd back up the truck to that edge, toss it. But we don't have to have that mindset anymore, out of sight, out of mind. And I was really struck, I continue to be struck by how this can seep in. So before I go much farther and talk about the 12 links, which relates to out of sight, out of mind, I want to share with you a few passages from a book that came out in 1989, called The End of Nature. It's not a very uplifting book, but I was introduced to this book by a principal that I was working for at the elementary school, and it has some very compelling facts in it. So I thought I'd share a few passages just to show how long it takes, we know how long it takes, for change to happen in the human mind. So the author is Bill McKibben. So he writes this: I'm writing this introduction in the late fall of 2005, thinking back 17 years ago to 1988, when as a young man, I was hard at work on The End of Nature. It was the first book for a general audience about global warming. There were details then that no one yet knew, But sadly, the story has played out as I expected at the time. By now, everyone knows more or less what's going on. Still, it's astounding to watch how deep and relentless the change has been. On this morning, so this is 2005, Hurricane Wilma, the record-setting 21st named Storm of the Year, bears down on the Gulf of Mexico. The pressure in its center this morning was the lowest ever recorded in the Atlantic. It follows by a few weeks the unmatched destruction of Katrina, and by a few more weeks a paper in Nature demonstrating that on average, hurricanes now last 60% longer and have peak winds 50% greater than a generation earlier. This is 2005. Perhaps the most important summation of American thinking came a couple of years after I wrote The End of Nature. The elder President Bush was facing a re-election battle against Bill Clinton, and so advisors persuaded him to attend the World Environmental Summit in Rio de Janeiro, possibly the most optimistic moment in recent history. Before he went, however, he told a press conference that the American way of life is not up for negotiation. In other words, don't care what you're going to say, we're not changing. One more passage. Well, some of us are changing. And we're all changing all the time, but our actions aren't changing in the way that we want them to, as far as the environment goes and other things. One last piece here. Our comforting sense of the permanence of our natural world, our confidence that it will change gradually and imperceptibly, if at all, is then the result of a subtly warped perspective. Changes that can affect us happen in our lifetime in our world, not just changes like wars, but bigger and more sweeping events. I believe that without recognizing it, we have already stepped over the threshold of such a change. We are at the end of nature. 2005. The other thing that was very uplifting to see on the Earth Day website was one sentence that said, "We stand with Ukraine." So everyone is standing with Ukraine. So now to what I spent a lot of time thinking about during the retreat. And it was really inspired by the teachings on the 12 links that Venerable Children gave from the book that she's written with His Holiness. And then I was supplementing that with reading passages from Geshe Sopa's Steps on the Path to Enlightenment on the 12 links. And so there was one passage that I kept coming back to again and again. It's not a profound passage, but it just absolutely keeps beating my ignorance in a very good way. So he writes this. I should say that this teaching on the 12 links has gotten my attention in a way that where I go to when I'm doubting are the disadvantages of samsara, all the sufferings of samsara. That's where I go to. It's in my face. I can't deny those teachings. But I noticed over time that my enthusiasm for doing something about the state of my mind would wax and wane. And so the waning part has really become disturbing to me. And this sense of urgency now is there because of these teachings. So Geshe Sopa writes, there are 3 supportive causes that actualize the main karmic seed. Craving and grasping are the afflictions that act as the moisture, awakening and activating the seed, and then a final karma, which is usually a mental action, a thought at the time of death, acts as the 3rd supportive cause. This final karma will be similar in its ethical tone, virtuous or non-virtuous, to the main karmic seed. If the first 2 factors are like moisture, then we can say that this 3rd nourishing factor is like the warmth necessary for a seed to germinate. If the projecting karma is non-virtuous, at the time of death, non-virtuous thoughts, which are a mental karma, arise and act as this 3rd supportive condition. If the projecting karma is virtuous, then virtuous thought arise and nourish that main seed. In this way, and here's the clincher, I kept coming back to, the thoughts of a person who is approaching death act as the essential condition that nurtures and activates the main projecting karmic seed. Okay, so we know that. I know it intellectually. But when I keep thinking about what I may be like at the time of death, when my body is breaking down and my mind, can I control my mind now? Not so well. And so at that point of death, am I going to be prepared for what's going to come? And so that's where I used the updates on the war in Ukraine to really, spend time meditating on the various ways that I could possibly die. Why not? Those people are dying in that way. Why won't I? Why can't I? And how will my mind be when I'm witnessing atrocities of the most extreme form, where I'm seeing the town I lived in or the city I used to live in reduced to rubble, or I'm seeing someone in tremendous pain because they're in the act of dying themselves? And how will my mind deal with that? So I kept coming back to this for the entire retreat and trying to rehearse these different scenarios and really seeing that, and then in the last session of the day, I would look back at the ways I would have lost my mental composure, shall we say, got irritated, got angry. And then I would say, really? That was worth it? That's just ridiculous. Getting upset over that, and that could be your mental state. You have no idea when you're going to die. You want to have a mind like that when you're dying? Come on. So it's helping, of course. The habit of getting irritated is a strong one to overcome. But just knowing that there's this, not knowing, getting to know, trying to really deeply understand that this is what's going to happen at the time of death has gotten my attention. So as we reflect on Earth Day, let's use this as an opportunity to see our incredible potential that we have. If you're in this room, if you're listening to this talk, you have the opportunity to practice the Dharma right now, and that is astounding. So let's take advantage of it. Let's really pay attention to Shantideva and our teachers who are telling us over and over again how to work with our mind when these disturbing things come up. And I'd like to finish with some really good Earth Day news. A few years ago, Venerable Damcho and I were really concerned about the bulbous bluegrass on the property. And it's an invasive weed. It's not on the noxious list yet, but it's invasive. And so when it gets a hold of an area of property, it just takes off and it sucks out all the nutrients in the soil and it takes over and it looks really bad. For about 5 days in the spring, like right about now, it looks like bright green, healthy grass. And then in a short period of time, it goes brown and there's these tufts that go up and they're floaty. And the whole thing looks really, really unpleasant. So the solution that we got from our dear friends at the Pondere Weed Board was to harrow these patches. So you get a harrow, which is like a large scraping tool, and you scrape the surface of the earth, which disrupts the seeds. And then in the fall, you plant grass seed. And then in the spring, technically, the new grass comes up. It's really the good grass, not the bulbous, but the good grass. So we did this whole thing 2 years ago, 3 years ago, actually. And then 2 years ago, we went out to these 4 plots. Nothing happened. Nothing grew. So we called out our friends at the weed board, and they came out and they looked at it and they said, yeah, well, the soil looks good. Maybe there's rock underneath. Maybe the turkeys ate it. So I was convinced the turkeys ate all of the seed. So another year goes by. We go out last year again. We look at the same 4 patches. Nothing growing. We call our friends out again. Again, they come out. We look at the patches. Yeah. Maybe there's rock underneath. Maybe the turkeys ate it. But guess what? This year, all 4 plots have real grass growing. Do you know why? Water. The missing element in the past 2 years was water at the right time. So if there's not all the causes and conditions present, the result won't come. Let's remember that as we continue to review the 12 links, and may that encourage us to purify and create more virtue And yeah, I'm just thrilled about that news. So, causes and conditions. This is what the 12 links is showing us so clearly. All those causes and conditions have to come together to bring a result. And the result will come. That's the thing.